The Secret Lives of Medieval Executioners. Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into one of those corners of history that everyone likes to pretend they never thought about, even though we absolutely did. So, if you've dimmed your lights, fluffed the pillow, and are emotionally prepared to spend the next hour and a half quietly judging medieval society, then welcome. Tonight we begin with the people everyone avoided, everyone feared, yet somehow everyone needed. The medieval executioners. Now, the funny thing about executioners is that, technically, they had one job. A very niche job. A job you didn't exactly dream of as a child unless you were raised in a particularly weird household. But as we float through medieval Europe, you'll see that their lives were far more complicated than guy with axe who cuts heads. They were walking contradictions, hated but essential, shunned but paid fairly well, isolated but constantly watched. Kind of like the medieval version of that one coworker who keeps the whole office functioning but nobody wants to sit next to at lunch. So let's settle in. Let's gently drift into the world of medieval towns, and the men who were forced, through birth, law, or bad life choices, to become the hands of public justice. Or, at least, justice as defined by people who still believed bathing once a month was ambitious. We're starting with something simple. A quiet introduction to what an executioner's life actually looked like, because shockingly, it wasn't all swinging blades and dramatic speeches. In fact, most of it was paperwork. And farm chores. And being stared at in markets like you were the town's free horror attraction. But we'll get to that. For now, let's slowly, gently, glide into the daily reality of a medieval executioner. Executioners in medieval Europe were, by design, not part of polite society. They lived at the edge of town. Literally. Their homes were often placed outside the city walls, as if the town wanted to pretend the whole punishment thing wasn't happening right there next to the bakery. You could almost imagine medieval city planners saying, "Yes, we need someone to do the hangings, but do we have to see him? Put him outside. Far away. Preferably behind a swamp." And yet, despite being shunned, executioners were kept on a very short leash. Town councils monitored them closely. People reported their behavior. If the executioner dared to drink in the wrong tavern or flirt with the wrong woman, someone was already writing a complaint. It was the medieval equivalent of being famous, but in the worst possible way. Everyone knew you, but nobody wanted to be seen talking to you. The irony, of course, is that executioners were often needed for far more than executions. Consider the medieval justice system. This was an era where the phrase, due process, basically meant, someone vaguely important said so. Punishments could range from public humiliation to mutilation to, yes, the classic full-body execution package. And all of these needed, well, the guy no one wanted to sit next to at dinner. Executioners were expected to handle everything from flogging to branding to amputations. Not because medieval towns were full of cartoon villains rubbing their hands together and saying, "Bring me the branding iron," but because this was simply the legal system of the time. Someone stole something. Remove a hand. Someone lied spectacularly. Brand them. Someone gossiped just a bit too loud in the wrong crowd. Shave their head and parade them around. And the executioner had to do all of it. Carefully. Precisely. Preferably without messing up, because, strangely enough, the one thing medieval crowds hated even more than executioners was a bad executioner. You would think an executioner would get some leeway in the job performance department. But no. If he failed to deliver a clean cut, the crowd got restless. Angry. Sometimes violent. Imagine being disliked, feared, underpaid, and also expected to perform at Olympic levels every time you swung an axe. Medieval Yelp reviews were brutal. But let's float a little deeper. It might surprise you that executioners were not always men with violent backgrounds. Many inherited the role. It was a family profession. Like being a blacksmith. Or a baker. Except, instead of bread, the family produced, well, executions. A legacy no child ever proudly announced in school. My father is the executioner, and I am the executioner's son. Great. Wonderful. Fantastic. No notes. In some cases, the job was given to criminals as a punishment. If you committed a serious enough offense, a judge might say, your choices are execution, or becoming the executioner. Which, honestly, sounds like a very unfun medieval career counseling session. And as you might imagine, many criminals chose to live. But the catch was that taking the job meant you were legally stuck in it. You were marked as dishonorable. Shunned. And your family, if you had one, was dragged down with you. This is actually why we see multi-generational executioner families across Germany, France, and parts of Italy. Once you entered the profession, society locked the door behind you. The only people who would marry you were other outcasts. The only people who would hire your children were other executioners. It was a profession shaped not by ambition, but by social exile. A quiet, lonely exile. But, and here's the relaxing twist, executioners were also surprisingly wealthy. Not royal-level wealthy. Nobody was commissioning frescoes of their faces. But they were paid consistently, given free housing, and often allowed to collect the clothing and belongings of the people they executed. Yes, you heard that right. Executioners basically ran a medieval thrift store of dead people's stuff. Charming. They also had side jobs, because why not triple task when your main job is already socially isolating? Executioners often acted as veterinarians, medical healers, herb specialists, bone setters, and sometimes, unofficial surgeons. Which is, honestly shocking. Imagine avoiding the man because he is considered unclean and cursed, but then running to him when you sprain your ankle. Medieval logic was a flexible thing. But executioners were skilled. They had steady hands. They were familiar with anatomy. They knew how to cut, cleanly, precisely, efficiently. Townspeople could pretend all day that the executioner was cursed, but when little Timmy broke his arm trying to sword fight a chicken, suddenly everyone remembered that the executioner was basically the closest thing they had to a doctor. And yes, this led to awkward moments. Many executioners reported people visiting them at night, hooded, whispering, begging for treatment, and then scurrying away so no one would see them. Because heaven forbid the town noticed you accepted medical help from the local outcast. No. Much better to risk infection and die dramatically. Let's drift a little further into daily life. Most executioners spent their mornings doing normal chores. Feeding animals. Repairing tools. Checking ropes. Maintaining blades. It was a slow, methodical routine, almost meditative, somewhere between a farmer, a carpenter, and a man preparing for a very specific, very grim performance that the entire town planned to attend. Executioners had assistants too. Usually sons or apprentices. They handled the setup, built scaffolds, dug graves, managed the crowd, and performed tasks deemed too low-level even for the already outcast profession. Medieval nepotism at its finest. The executioner's family lived under the same restrictions. His wife was banned from certain markets. His children were bullied, excluded, and sometimes refused baptism or communion. There are records of executioners' daughters being barred from married life unless they married within the dishonorable class. In fact, one famous executioner family in Nuremberg kept such detailed ledgers of their marriages, children, duties, and punishment methods that their family chronicle is now considered one of the most important historical documents on executioner life. Imagine your family diary becoming the backbone of academic research because your job was too taboo for normal archives. That's medieval history for you. Full of accidental historians. Now, even though executioners lived on the edge of town, they were often required to maintain the instruments of justice in pristine condition. It wasn't all hanging ropes and axes. They maintained stocks, pillories, iron collars, branding irons, chains, carts, wheels, and all sorts of wooden and metal contraptions. The town didn't ask where he stored these items. They didn't want to know. Much like no one asks what's in the junk drawer in your kitchen, even though 70% of it is questionable. Executioners also traveled. When a neighboring town needed assistance, maybe their own executioner was sick or simply not good at his job, they would rent another. Executioners were medieval freelancers before freelancing was cool. They went from town to town, performing their duties, and getting paid in coin, food, and lodging. And, of course, more social stigma. A traveling bundle of awkward energy. Let's float into an interesting contradiction. Executioners were legally banned from touching most things in the market. Bread. Produce. Imported goods. Basically anything that normal people touched. They were believed to carry some kind of spiritual contamination. But, and this is deliciously ironic, they were also required to dispose of dead animals, clean up after executions, handle diseased bodies, and sometimes even remove rotting waste from town roads. So medieval society would say, "Don't touch our vegetables, you're filthy." And then immediately say, "Oh, but please handle this plague corpse, thanks." Consistency was not their strong suit. The weirdest part. Many executioners developed a strange social magnetism. People avoided them publicly, but secretly relied on them. Quiet favors. Hidden requests. Midnight visits. A whispered thank you. Followed by immediate denial. Executioners became the silent backbone of a community that refused to admit it needed them. Some even became folk heroes. Gentle giants who treated prisoners kindly. Men who carried out justice as humanely as the era allowed. Men who gave condemned prisoners water, comfort, or final prayers. Men who were respected behind closed doors, even though society pretended otherwise. There's something soft and oddly sad about that. Alright, let's gently float back in. Comfort, or final prayers. Men who were respected behind closed doors, even though society pretended otherwise. There's something soft and oddly sad about that. Alright, let's gently float back in. If you're still awake, which is already impressive, you've slipped nicely into the soft, slightly uncomfortable world of medieval executioners. We've met them on the edge of town, watched them be avoided by polite society, and admired their accidental side hustle as the local bonesetter. So now, let's drift even deeper. Tonight, we're heading into the part of their lives where things get even weirder, mostly because medieval people loved rules that contradicted themselves every 12 seconds. So let's relax, breathe, maybe mentally wrap yourself in a blanket, and slowly follow the executioner into the more personal corners of his life. One of the things medieval towns loved, besides plague, superstition, and never washing their hands, was bureaucracy. And weirdly enough, executioners were buried under paperwork. Yes. Paperwork. The man in charge of chopping off limbs had to file reports on how, when, and why he chopped off limbs. He had to log equipment maintenance, record fines, list confiscated goods, and submit receipts. Because medieval town councils did not want a scandal like, "We only ordered 3 branding irons but the executioner billed us for 4. Medieval accounting, the true horror genre. Town scribes frequently reviewed these records. Sometimes they summoned the executioner to testify about inconsistencies. You can imagine him standing there, awkwardly explaining why he needed an extra length of rope or why the last axe blade cracked. Meanwhile the council, composed of men whose most dangerous task was tripping over their own robes, nodded gravely as if they understood the complex physics of decapitation. Not exactly the career you dream of. But strangely compassionate. Let's drift into another odd element of their lives, their homes. Executioner houses often had crossroads nearby, because criminals, carts, and servants needed easy access. They also had large yards, useful for preparing equipment or building scaffolds, and absolutely horrifying for anyone strolling too close at night. You can imagine a villager walking home in the dark, hearing metallic clinks from the yard, and telling themselves, it's probably a horse. Yes. Definitely a horse. Good night. Inside the house, executioners lived fairly normally. Wives cooked. Children studied. Laundry hung by the fireplace. Except all of this was overshadowed by the fact that no matter how well they behaved, the neighbors never forgot who lived there. That's why many executioner families formed a close-knit circle. They married within the dishonorable class, knackers, gravediggers, tanners, anyone considered unclean. Not because they enjoyed it, but because those were the only people willing. This created entire subcommunities. Quiet networks of people performing society's least glamorous tasks. The executioner became the unofficial leader among them, because he interacted with officials more than anyone else. Not respected, but needed. And as society shunned him publicly, the executioner carved out a private world of comfort within his own walls. But let's float somewhere darker, but calmly so. Medieval executioners didn't just handle punishments. They also cleaned up after everyone else's mistakes. When a body needed to be removed, who did the town call? The executioner. When diseased animals died in the street? Executioner. When a criminal died during torture before trial? Executioner. When a noble accidentally caused a scandal and needed the evidence handled quietly? Yes, executioner. He knew every secret no one wanted to acknowledge. He saw everyone at their worst moments. He buried, burned, cleaned, disposed, carted, dragged, washed, or amputated anything the town wanted to forget. It's hard to imagine a more contradictory life: hated but trusted, excluded but indispensable, feared but relied upon intimately. Now, let's float toward their interactions with townsfolk. Because they did interact. They had to. They shopped for tools. They bought food, although usually a shopkeeper placed items on the ground instead of handing them directly. They walked through streets while parents whispered, "Don't stare," but that's him. Children were half terrified, half fascinated. Women averted their eyes. Men stepped aside politely, giving the executioner too much space, like he was carrying an invisible bubble of doom. And yet, whenever he passed, all conversations quietly drifted toward silence. Imagine being the permanent buzzkill of medieval town life. It's tragic in a slow, soft, inevitable way. But the irony continues: many executioners had unusually clean homes. They kept tidy gardens. They raised healthy animals. Their fences were well built. Why? Because everyone judged them twice as harshly. If a baker let his yard get messy, people shrugged. If the executioner let a chicken wander too far, someone sent a complaint to the council. It's the medieval version of having a spotlight on you, for all the wrong reasons. Let's drift forward again, into the executioner's unexpected social power. Yes. Power. Soft, quiet, indirect power. Despite being shunned, executioners often became influencers, medieval influencers, which meant absolutely not glamorous but surprisingly respected behind closed doors. Town officials visited them for private discussions. Merchants consulted them about disputes. Travelers asked for directions. Doctors asked for anatomical insights. Blacksmiths sought advice on metal durability. Soldiers asked about blade angles. And criminals? They were terrified. Not just of execution, but because executioners were great trackers. They knew body weight, footprints, wounds, behavioral patterns. Some assisted sheriffs in investigations. They were basically medieval forensic analysts, with none of the prestige and all of the awkwardness. Let's float into marriages for a moment, because that's a rabbit hole all on its own. Executioners struggled to find partners. Many daughters married other executioners or dishonorable class men. In some cities, an executioner's daughter might be bought for marriage, because nobody else wanted the association. It's bleak. But it also created long dynasties, 3, 4, sometimes 10 generations of executioners. One famous family, the Rossners of Germany, kept a 300-year chronicle. Every marriage, every punishment, every job. Today, historians read it like a medieval reality show. Slow, calm, occasionally depressing, with an alarming number of rope-related expenses. But despite being shunned, executioner families bonded deeply. Their loyalty was intense. Their internal culture was strong. They developed their own customs, recipes, holidays, and emotional support systems. When society closed its door, they built their own house. Now, let's float to the executioner's relationship with the condemned. This part is strangely tender. Executioners often spent more time with criminals in their final hours than their family, clergy, or friends. They offered water, food, prayer, conversation. Many executioners said their job was not to kill, but to deliver closure. Medieval justice wanted finality. The executioner, paradoxically, was the calm, grounding presence in a moment of fear. Some executioners became known for compassion. Others for professionalism. A few, unfortunately, for cruelty, but they rarely lasted long. People hated a showy executioner. They wanted someone quiet. Efficient. Emotionally distant, but not sadistic. The best executioners treated their work like a ritual. Not a performance. You can see it in their records, everything written in steady, neutral language. Nothing dramatic. Nothing personal. Just routine. Like farmers recording harvests. And when crowds gathered, which they always did, they watched the executioner more than they watched the condemned. They judged his skill. His posture. His demeanor. Was he calm? Controlled? Precise? Imagine being part of a public spectacle that you didn't want and couldn't avoid, where everyone critiqued everything you did, but nobody would ever compliment you. A deeply medieval problem. Let's drift now into one of the strangest responsibilities of the job. Executioners were often the ones who placed bodies into gibbets or hanged criminals from town gates. These bodies were sometimes left there for months as a warning. Which meant the executioner had to maintain them. Adjust ropes. Replace parts. Remove parts. Clean bones. Shoo away animals. Basically, medieval billboard maintenance. He also managed the gallows. Which, like everything else, needed repairs. Rain soaked the wood. Wind broke supports. One embarrassing gallows malfunction could lead to riots. So the executioner spent hours hammering, sawing, and tightening bolts while pretending he wasn't basically the town's weirdest handyman. Finally, let's float into the emotional life of the executioner. Because yes, they had inner lives. Many struggled with loneliness. Some drank heavily. Some grew numb. Some wrote letters that still survive, quiet, tired letters about duty, family, faith, and regret. They rarely expressed pride in their job. Mostly resignation. Acceptance. A calm settling into a life that was chosen for them, whether they liked it or not. But there were also executioners who embraced routine. Who focused on the good salary. The free housing. The stability. The medical practice. The ability to provide for their families in ways other jobs couldn't. Many saw themselves as servants of order. Tools of the law. Not villains. Not heroes. Just, necessary. Their lives were slow, heavy, and quietly tragic. But in all that slowness, you find a strange calm. A man doing a job he didn't choose. A society relying on someone it refused to acknowledge. A profession built on contradictions. And that soft, awkward contradiction is what makes medieval executioners oddly fascinating. The Age of Ideas, also called Everyone Starts Writing Really Long Books. Philosophers start popping up like mushrooms after rain. You get Voltaire, the king of sarcasm. Rousseau, who has opinions about society. Montesquieu, who basically invented your civics class. John Locke, who says government shouldn't be a dictatorship, which was shocking at the time. These people write things like, humans deserve rights. Kings shouldn't be able to imprison you just because they're bored. Maybe we should test science instead of guessing. Everyone else reacts like they've just discovered cheat codes for reality. Microscope chapter, science is no longer illegal. The Enlightenment also gives us scientists who look at the natural world and say, I will understand you. Even if it kills me. And often, it almost does. You get Newton realizing apples and planets follow the same laws. Halley predicting a comet like he has DLC access to the universe. Hooke staring at bugs under a microscope like they owe him money. Science evolves from alchemy plus hope to experiments plus math, which is a huge glow-up. Church officials are uncomfortable. Kings are confused. Philosophers are thrilled. Crossed Swords chapter, The American Revolution, a geopolitical breakup letter. So now that everyone has new ideas about freedom, the American colonies look at Britain and go, you know what? We think we could do this whole running a country thing ourselves. Britain says, no. You're literally our children. The colonies say, watch us. Then they write the Declaration of Independence, basically a polite middle finger written in very beautiful handwriting. The war begins. Britain has money, ships, the largest army, the confidence of a man who thinks he's absolutely winning. America has farmers, militia men, George Washington's bone structure. France, eventually. Spoiler. France tips the scale. Britain goes home. America says, freedom achieved heavy checkmark. Europe looks at this and thinks, oh no. What if our people want freedom too? They do. Fire chapter, the French Revolution, when the people say, enough. France in the late 18th century is basically a powder keg. The king is clueless. The nobles are disconnected. The peasants are starving. Bread prices are ridiculous. The country is bankrupt. Eventually, the French population collectively snaps. What follows is mobs. Storming the Bastille. Very dramatic speeches. Very dramatic executions. A lot of guillotines. Heads drop faster than Wi-Fi speed in a lift. France goes from monarchy republic chaos another republic empire. Which brings us to the man who refused to stay short in history. Military medal chapter, Napoleon Bonaparte, the man, the myth, the height discourse. Napoleon rises from artillery officer to Emperor of France in the historical equivalent of a speedrun. He is brilliant, strategic, ambitious, slightly allergic to losing, and absolutely done with Europe's nonsense. He conquers Italy, Austria, Prussia, most of Europe, honestly. He even tries to take over Egypt for some reason. Europe looks at him and says, could you please chill? Napoleon says, no. The winning streak ends. He invades Russia in winter, a bold but disastrous life choice shared by many historical figures who apparently never read previous chapters. The French army freezes. Napoleon retreats. Europe dogpiles him. He loses. Gets exiled. Returns. Loses again. Gets exiled further away, where the British can keep an eye on him forever. The Napoleonic era ends. Europe breathes again. But not for long. Because something huge is coming. Gear chapter, the Industrial Revolution, the world gets a software update. The late 18th and 19th centuries bring humanity's biggest upgrade since fire. Suddenly machines are everywhere. Steam engines. Power looms. Railroads. Factories. The printing press on steroids. People move from villages into cities, where they are greeted by smog. 10 people sharing one room. Child labor. Factories with enough noise to permanently rearrange your brain cells. But productivity skyrockets. Wealth increases. The world accelerates. Empires expand. Colonialism intensifies. Countries begin competing like it's a global leaderboard. And eventually, all this tension, nationalism, and new weapons lead to one of history's darkest chapters. If you want to continue to